And thank you to all of you for still being here. It's nice to be back in person meetings. I would also like to point out that the work that I'm presenting to you was done in collaboration with two of my PhD students who are sitting there, Iman and Alfaf. And it was in fact a kind of an emergency project during the lockdown. Where I realized that being new students, they hadn't yet joined the community, that they felt a bit isolated, and that it would be great to be doing some real research project together, where they had to collaborate a lot, because I strongly feel that you learn as much from your peers as you do from your supervisors and your teachers, and that by collaborating, they would learn a lot, and that's exactly how it turned out to be. Now, the topic of flow, I started teaching French as a foreign language at Birkbeck in this very building in 1994, taught French until 2004, and I was always teaching on Friday evenings from 6 to 9. So if you are a Birkbeck student, you remember it's the worst slot. So it's also the toughest slot if you're the teacher, because you are also tired after a week's work. And hence you have to make students forget that their friends are having a pint at the pub and that they are hungry and that it's been a long week. And hence it was absolutely crucial to get them in a state of flow where they would totally forget what time it was and where they were, and they would be totally immersed in the activity. And the interesting thing was that that usually worked. And then by 5 to 9, I would say, okay, guys, 5 to 9, weekend is about to start. And the interesting thing then was to observe people falling out of that state of flow, where they suddenly realize, oh my God, it's 5 to 9. Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I'm tired. And they would kind of stagger out of the room, and I would follow them, you know, being exhausted, because you realize teaching how much a physical experience it is. And you just couldn't think at that point that 10 minutes ago, everybody was whoa, buzzing. And then suddenly you kind of, it hits you, you know, you've expended all your energy and you need to go home and go to bed. So that's when I became interested in flow, in fact, from a teaching perspective rather than from a theoretical one. So the background of flow is positive psychology, which is the focus on the positive things in life rather than the traditional psychology, which looks at the things that go wrong in life. And so hence the positive personality traits, but also so like resilience and grit and phenomena like flow. And it's particularly useful to look at the work by Barbara Fredrickson, who designed the broaden and build hypothesis. And her idea is that if a learner is in a positive state of mind, they will absorb more than if they are in a negative state of mind. And as if you are teachers, you know that that is absolutely true. If students are too anxious, they shut down, they feel threatened, they don't want to participate. If you get them laughing, if you get them in a positive mood, they're more likely to remember stuff and they're more likely to progress. So this whole positive psychology has had a huge positive impact on second language acquisition. Now, flow, it's a concept designed by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who died quite recently, and who described flow as an optimal psychophysical state where you are in a state of total concentration. You can't worry about anything else. You're not self-conscious. Your sense of time gets distorted. You forget how much time is going on or what the time is. And it's highly motivating. Being in a state of flow is something absolutely wonderful. and you want to prolong it for as long as possible. And that's also why, as a teacher, it can be extremely frustrating if you have a student during the class who disrupts the flow. It can happen, of course, because then you realize just how hard it is for you as a teacher to get them back in a state of flow. And sometimes it's not possible anymore, because people are suddenly tired at 8:30 instead of 9:05, and you won't get them back in a state of flow, and that can be a bit frustrating. Now, the key to getting people in a state of flow is that they find the right balance between challenge and skills. So if something is too hard, overly challenging, they give up. There is no flow. If it's too easy, they're not interested. They won't get into flow. So it's really a matter of finding the right balance. And I think it's comparable to video games. I don't play video games myself, but I know that you can play a certain game at the beginner's level. So it means that it won't be too challenging. You don't need immense skills to get to the next level. And as you get to the next level, your skills increase and the challenge increases together. So I think it's really the same phenomenon. Now, we were interested in finding out to what extent this magical state of flow is linked to the learner emotions, whether it was linked to their anxiety or enjoyment. And so anxiety has been defined as the tendency to be anxious in the L2 class, in the L2 environment. And enjoyment, Peter McIntyre and myself defined it as a positive emotion that learners experience when their psychological needs are met during challenging language learning activities. So it's a complex, positively balanced emotion. And I would say that it can be between medium and high arousal, meaning you can enjoy something intensely reading a book on your own. So it doesn't need to be in a buzzing classroom or environment. So this is the scale we developed to measure foreign language classroom anxiety. In fact, based on Elaine Horitz's original 33-item scale. This is the short form of the enjoyment scale that we adapted last year with 3 lower order factors: teacher appreciation, personal enjoyment, and social enjoyment. And then, of course, all of us have been talking about this in between the sessions, about how nice it is to be back in an in-person version of this L-SLARF colloquium. The online version was okay, but it wasn't as much fun as it was. And I think that the literature seems to suggest that COVID and emergency remote teaching has had the same effect on everybody, teachers and learners. So people had to cope with this relative social isolation. And it has effects we discovered also on enjoyment and anxiety. With Pia Resnick, we discovered that there was a significant drop in enjoyment in the online classes compared to the in-person classes, and that there was also a smaller but still significant drop in anxiety. So participants reported being less anxious because, they couldn't be caught out, or they couldn't be forced to participate. They could switch their cameras off, they could mute, they could hide. So that was an explanation. And then with the same database that we used for the paper I'm presenting today, we did a separate paper where we found exactly the same thing. A drop in enjoyment in online classes, higher levels of boredom, and slightly lower levels of anxiety. So this seems to be a pretty systematic phenomenon. Now, research on flow really started in 2003, where Egbert found that flow experience could happen, that it was linked to task design, which is also why I asked about tasks. Depending on the type of task, people may get in a state of flow or not. And then a number of studies that showed that, in fact, this challenge skill balance is absolutely crucial. Also that getting students in a state of flow is in fact a good way to strengthen their motivation, because it's so nice to be in flow that you go to your next class expecting to be in a state of flow again. And so you crave that state. Pignel and Albert pointing out that it's in fact still relatively under-researched in the literature, which is why we thought, okay, let's do some work on this. Now, some of the most amazing innovative work on this is by a team around Nozawa, a Japanese team, where they found that there was in fact a link between students at the level of the brain. So they had interbrain synchronization that was linked to interpersonal similarity of flow state dynamics. So people who were working together, so they were pairs, their brains synchronized. And afterwards, they reported that they were in a state of flow compared to people who were working alone. So it's clear that flow is really a group. It's a social phenomenon. You get into a state of flow together. And it's much rarer to get in a state of flow when you are involved in a solitary activity. So with Peter McIntyre, we have a study that we hope will come out soon in Applied Linguistics Review, where we used Larson and Saint-Mihai's experience sampling method for items, the percentage of time that the person felt was totally absorbed, lost the sense of time, was totally fulfilled, and totally happy in the foreign language classroom. So we discovered that the average time in state of flow was 59%. Originally, we thought, isn't that high? Are they really in a state of flow for almost 60% of the class? We were a bit surprised by that, but then in fact, compared with the literature, it seems to be rather normal. That's really what learners report. And then participants also reported on open questions on an open question on enjoyable episodes in their classroom, and that allowed us to pinpoint the source of the enjoyment and the duration of the episode that they described and the intensity of that episode. And then we correlated it with enjoyment anxiety. And as expected, we found a much stronger positive correlation with enjoyment, a weaker negative correlation with anxiety, which is what you would expect. And then also we discovered that, in fact, the more advanced the learners were, the more likely they were to be in a state of flow for longer, and compared to younger or less advanced learners who may have a spark of flow, but it was only a spark. It's only later that it became more intense and longer. And so here this is a graph showing that if the source of the enjoyable episode was the self, that these people didn't spend that much time in flow compared to those who clearly in their episode described that the teacher was fantastic, the peers were great, and I was so enthusiastic. So that these people spent more time in flow. And so you also see that those who described a powerful positive emotion episode, that they were more in flow, and that those who described longer episodes of enjoyment were also the ones who were in flow for a longer time. So here we wondered, is there, do students spend a larger proportion of time in flow in in-person or online classes? Are the same people spending a lot of time in flow? And what are the learner internal and external variables linked to flow in both conditions? So the Alfaf and Iman used their local networks, so in Saudi Arabia and in Kurdish Iraq, to collect data from EFL learners, and you see their characteristics there. And what we found was exactly what we expected, namely that, yes, in fact, they did spend close to half their time in a state of flow in the online class, which you could say is not bad, right? But of course, they remembering the pre-COVID days in the in-person classes, they remembered being in flow much more. So although there is a statistically significant difference, the effect size is in fact only small. And then we discovered also that the same students were in flow both in in-person and in online classes. So that's again something that you could expect. And this was in a way the most interesting finding, that the relationship between learner internal, learner external variables and proportion of time in flow was different in both conditions. So that you see there were many more significant correlations for the in-person class, where being in flow was linked to age, English proficiency, attitude towards the English teacher, frequency of use of English by the teacher, whereas in the online condition, it was in fact only the attitude towards the English teacher that was linked to flow. And even then, the effect size was smaller. So that was kind of an unexpected finding, because we expected that the same variables would have the same effect whether it was in person or in flow. But it seems that in the flow, that in the online condition, students, that it didn't seem to matter much. So we looked also at the qualitative data that we collected through a number of open questions. And as you see, we asked the students what they liked in the in-person and online classes and what they disliked, so the positive and the negative. And we discovered that they mentioned different things, like what they liked in the in-person classes was the interaction. And I think that the interaction is really the key to flow, again, because it's a group phenomenon. And there were things that they liked about online teaching, namely the flexibility that it gave. And then the anxiety arose in the online condition was mostly to do with technology. And I didn't realize, but technology, it could be like a power outage where, or the connection getting lost. And that could be a cause of anxiety, and that would probably also break the flow, because if you need to spend 5 or 10 minutes to log back in, you're completely out of the flow. So here are some of the things that our participants said, you know, how much they enjoyed unique interactions and building the human connection. And again, it's something we complained about, you know, we lacked that human interaction as we were sitting behind our computers during the lockdown. So the discussion, why is it that there was this difference between both conditions? I think that it's really crucially about context. That if you're sitting in a classroom surrounded by your peers with the teacher in front, and even in the familiar classroom where, you know, you may have posters and pictures and all this reminds you that you are part of this bigger world and that you are part of this group. If you are sitting behind your computer, there are more sources of distraction, because, you know, people are maybe you are listening to music, or you are eating, or you turn your camera off. You are, in fact, you are disconnected from what is happening on the screen. And so you could easily feel that these online classes are emotionally disembodied, that it's like you can easily distance yourself from it and pretend that it is not there. If you are sitting in the classroom, you cannot pretend that these people are not all around you. And so, of course, some students may prefer being hidden, yeah, so the conclusion is that the teaching condition clearly affects learners' time in flow. And I think that being in front of your computer means not just physical and social isolation, but in this case, I would say mental isolation, where they kind of closed off mentally, so that everything that mattered for them getting in flow in the classroom suddenly didn't matter anymore. They like closed down all the hatches. And so no man or woman is an island. I guess that learning is harder on a small island, even with an internet connection. Thank you.